Hi there, welcome back to the Flask Mastery Series. In today's tutorial, we shall be diving into web development with Flask by building a simple to-do application. So if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon to stay updated on all my latest tutorials. So let's get started. So first and foremost, we are going to go ahead and create a working directory for our application by opening the command prompt. And within the command prompt, we are going to go ahead and create that folder by typing mkdir, where mkdir stands for make directory, and then we pass in the name for our folder. So for this case, it will be Flask to do application. So what this command does, behind the scenes, it creates a new subfolder within this folder. So we can see that we are already having this folder. So now we have to go ahead and navigate within this folder that we are going to work with. So we navigate through the folder by typing cd change command, then the folder name, then we press enter. So for my case, the IDE that I'm currently using is Visual Studio Code. So I'll go ahead and open our working directory within Visual Studio Code by typing code space dot then enter. So as you can see, we are building the to-do application from scratch. So the first thing we always have to do is creating a virtual environment that is going to be storing the project dependencies. So I'll go ahead and open the terminal. So within the terminal, I'm going to go ahead and type python -m, then I invoke the venv virtual environment model. Then for this case, the virtual environment name can be virtualenv still, then you press enter. So this command goes ahead and it creates a subfolder for the virtual environment within our working directory. So having created the virtual environment, we now have to go ahead and activate the virtual environment. And for those who are working with the Windows operating system, we know that for us to activate the virtual environment, the first thing we do is we pass in the virtual environment name, and for this case we named it as venv. Then we type a backslash. Then you know that within this subfolder for the virtual environment, we have the scripts subfolder too. So we type scripts, then the backslash. Then within the scripts, we know that we are going to be invoking the activate file. This. So we type activate, then we press enter. So if it is your first time working with the virtual environments in terms of Flask, you check out one of my tutorials where I actually show you how to work with the virtual environment from scratch. So having created the virtual environment, we now have to go ahead and install the necessary project dependencies. So having created the virtual environment, we are now going to go ahead and start installing the libraries that we are going to work with. So first and foremost, if you're to build any Flask application, the first library you always have to install is that one of Flask. So we install that by typing pip install Flask, then we press enter. So all the installations are done having we confirmed that our virtual environment has been set active. So for us to confirm our installation, we can always use the requirements.txt file that shows the current dependencies that the project is working. So we type pip freeze requirements.txt, then we press enter. So this command goes ahead and it lists the current dependencies that our project is working with. So as you can see, apart from Flask, these other dependencies come pre-installed. We have the Worksack, Markup Safe, Ginger2 for templating, and all these others. So we can now see that we have successfully installed Flask within our virtual environment. So regarding the project structure, our Flask to-do application is going to have its user interface built in HTML, CSS, and Bootstrap. So that means that we have to go ahead and create a folder that is going to store our template files. So we shall therefore create a new subfolder, and we can name it templates, and this folder is going to store all the files that are going to have the user interfaces for the to-do application. So within this template folder, we can go ahead and create a new file ab index.html, then we press enter. So we are going to go ahead and build the user interface for our to-do application. So for now, I'm going to assume that you already have some HTML extensions like the HTML boilerplate installed. Oh, my bad, I am actually working offline. So when I try to refresh, so within the extensions, we can already search for the HTML snippets. But for this case, we shall first of all ensure that we have the HTML boilerplate, this extension, installed. So the boilerplate will give us a basic startup structure for our to-do application. So when we type HTML boilerplate, then enter, this is what is created. So this is the basic syntax or structure for HTML for all web pages that you are going to develop. So I'll go ahead and update the title to do app. So within the body, we are going to go ahead and create a header section for our to-do application and comment this. So the header section is going to be embedded within a div that has the header class. So we can type .header, then enter, and I'm going to give the header class a height of 75, and not forgetting that we are going to be working with Bootstrap, so endeavor to add the Bootstrap CDN link within the header tags. So within this div element for the header, I'm going to go ahead and first of all add the section tags, and with the fact that we are working with Bootstrap, I can pass in a class container to automatically add padding left, right, top and bottom to our elements. So having added the container class, we shall go ahead and create a heading using the h3 HTML heading tags, and we can pass in to do app. So the class for this, in terms of the styling, using the class attribute, we can ensure that the text has a white font color. So I will pass in the text white class for Bootstrap, and I'll give it some padding left of 2 pixels. So we know that for us to be able to create these tasks, we shall need to work with a form in a way that it's going to collect that different kind of tasks that we are going to be creating. So I'll go ahead and create a CRUD.CRUD, and within the CRUD, I'll now create a form, and within the form we shall go ahead and display the input field alongside the button in a row. So the designing for this is, so for responsive design, we can see that I'm using the grid design layout of Bootstrap in a way that we have the row, with the fact that I have passed in this class, and within the row we are now creating the div elements for the input field, and it is having a class of 10, and we know that the maximum size for all the columns must equate to 12. So if we are to give the input field 10, then the button will take 2. So having created the header class, I'm going to go ahead and minimize this section. Then we shall create the list section. So within the list section, we know that we are going to go ahead and create a list, and for the styling, in terms of the list, we are still using Bootstrap, and we know that for us to be able to work with the stylings for the list, we can always use the list group, and I'm just trying to pass in a shadow class so that we add some shadow effect to the lists. So having we worked on our user interface, we are first of all going to go ahead and test it. You can see that having tested it, we are seeing our web page without any stylings. So we are going to go ahead and add some bit of CSS styling so that our web page looks better. So I'm going to go ahead and work with our CSS internal styles by creating the style tags within our header tags. So style, then I will embed the CSS within these tags, and I'll also try to format it. So we can see that our styles have been added to our web page. So we are going to go ahead and work on the backend so that we make our web page dynamic in a way that we have the ability to create tasks and also view the tasks that have been created. So for us to implement the backend logic, we are going to go ahead and create a new file. So you make sure that you're out of the templates, and within this workspace we shall create an app.python file that is going to store the controllers we are going to work with to implement the logic. So first and foremost, you want to go ahead and import the different classes that we are going to work with. So we shall import from the Flask mode, we import the Flask class. So having we imported the Flask class, we are going to go ahead and create an app instance from the Flask class. So we shall create an app variable that is going to store our new app instance for Flask. App goes to Flask. So we shall invoke the Flask class, and we shall go ahead and pass in the required parameters for now. Having created a new Flask instance, we are going to go ahead and create a function that is going to render our HTML file that is within the folder for the templates. So to do that, the first thing we have to do is to create an app decorator such that we have ability to create a new path for our function. So app.route, and then the fact that this is going to be our index page, which we can add a backslash. Then we shall go ahead and add our function. So for now it can be home, and it's not taking in any parameters. So we want to render the template. So with the fact that we are going to be rendering this index.html file, we want to import the render template such that we have the ability to render this template having accessed the index path. So render template. So the first parameter this function takes in is the name of the file that we want to render. So we are going to render our index.html file. And also we want to run the app in a way that we are directly accessing our app.py. So if we are directly accessing our main application, we want to turn the debug mode to true. So we check if the name is equal to main, terminate, then we want to run our development environment in a way that the debug mode is true. So app.run, we access the run function, and now we can see that we have parameters for debugging. So we shall enter debug to true. So we are going to go ahead and first of all try to see if we can access our index file. So we are going to go ahead and now run our application by typing Python. Then we access the app.python file. So we can see that when we run our application, debug mode is turned to true, and this is a warning that we are working with a development server, and by default Flask runs on port 5000. So I'll control this and click. So when we refresh, this is what we are having. So there are cases whereby you might not actually access your index.html file. So whenever you create a new instance, you can see that within this Flask class, when I try to hover, we also have parameters for the static URL path and the static folder. Same applies to the template folder. So for now, if you're to render any web page, that means that you can also pass in the template folder, and then you define it according to the name that you gave to the folder. So for now it is templates. So we go ahead and register it here by typing templates, and you can see that the fact that the debug mode has been set to true, any changes that occur within our development environment are automatically updated. So we are going to go ahead and create a function that is going to enable us to create the new tasks. So we shall add the decorator for this function, and then the path for this can be /add. And as of now, we don't need any other parameters, so we can keep it simple. And then the function, it can be create new task. So we know that whenever we are making a request, we shall always expect to get a particular response. So meaning that if the user is actually going to be entering tasks from a user interface, it tends to show us that we are getting a particular request from the user interface. So we therefore have to work with the request object in a way that we have access to the incoming requests through the request object. So the first thing we want to do is to go ahead and import requests from Flask. So we shall define a variable that is going to store the value that is coming from the request object. So if someone is going to work with actually if a user is going to enter a particular task, then we need a variable that is going to store this value. So task, then we assign it. So with the fact that we always work with the request and response cycle, so when someone makes a request for creating a new task, we access the request object. And with the fact that we are going to be working with the user interface, we now have access to the form, and we are going to work with the get such that we have access to the particular field that the client or the user is going to be working with. So the name we pass in depends on what exactly has been assigned in terms of the attributes for our form. So we can see that we are having the form, this, and within the form we are targeting our input field, but the input field has an attribute name and the value for this is task. So this is the same name that we actually pass in the get method, so task. So that means that if you're actually passing in a value like task name, then this should be task name. So we want to get the value for the task. In other words, if someone says understanding Python from scratch as a particular task for a day, we want to get that value and store it within a particular variable. So for now, we want to work with our tasks in a way that we are creating them temporarily. So we are going to go ahead and create a global variable tasks such that it is a list in a way that it stores all the tasks coming in from the request. So for us to be able to store them, we have to access the tasks list and append. With the fact that we are working with a list, we shall be appending the tasks. So tasks.append. So if we are to append, we are appending this data that is coming from the request. So we append the task. So having we stored all the tasks within our list variable, we want to go ahead and redirect to a particular route. So we shall go ahead and import the redirect from Flask. So redirect. So the redirect function can take in a particular path to which we want to redirect. So for this case, we can also import URL for such that we can now pass in the URL for function, and it's going to take in the function name to which we are going to be redirecting. So if we are going to redirect to the home, that means that we can pass in the name, which is home. So having we implemented our logic, this is more like the controller or the function that is going to work on ability for us to create new tasks. So we shall therefore go ahead and ensure that our front end or our user interface, in other words, the form, is in line with the back end. In other words, if our integration has been set. So we know that the form takes in the method, post, and the action, which is what we have defined in terms of the route. So we can see that with the fact that we are going to be posting or creating data from our user interface, we have to go ahead and pass in the method. So the route function also has the second parameter as the method, which takes in a list of different methods that we shall be working with. So with the fact that we are creating new tasks, the method has to be post. And we know that by default, it is a get method. So it is the same as we also pass in get, but mainly if we are creating new content, we are using the post method behind the scenes. So method is post and then the action, and then we have our button for submit. So we can therefore go ahead and try to test to see whether our logic is being implemented. Okay, so I'm going to rerun the application and refresh. So not forgetting that whenever we create new tasks from our back end, we have to go ahead and render these tasks on our user interface here. So we have to go ahead and pass in this variable within the render template. We have the ability to always pass in any other variable that is going to be used on the user interface. So the variable for now, we can create tasks to keep it simple, and we assign it to this list, this. So tasks, such that on the user interface, we know that we are having a list that is going to display our tasks that are being stored within our list from the back end. So we are going to work with the Ginger 2 syntax in a way that we create the curly braces, we open, then we loop through our variable that has been passed in within the backend, which is tasks. So for task in tasks, then we close this. We want to go ahead and display this element with the fact that it's going to be the dynamic element. In other words, all the tasks are going to be displayed in a list. So this is the dynamic part. And we have to end our loop. So we open the curly braces, percentage, then end for. Then we close. Okay. So shall therefore go ahead and try to refresh. So I can try to add a new task, for example, learning GitHub basics, and we click on the create. Looks like the value is not okay. So we can see that the task is being created, but we are not displaying the name. So we actually forgot to go ahead and display the value that we are using to loop through. So this is task, such that the name of that task can be displayed within our list item. So if I try to refresh, we can see that Learning GitHub Basics has been created. So now we are going to go ahead and work on the method that enables us to delete a particular task from our user interface. So we are going to go ahead and create a decorator for this, such that we access the route and append or add a different route. So the route will be /delete. Then we know that whenever we are deleting items from a list, or whenever we are deleting a particular item, we want to delete it in a way that we are only deleting that particular item. So in other words, we are going to be deleting them, for this case, with their particular index, with the fact that we are working with a list. So for this case, we can go ahead and add the variable to the route. So with the fact that each item from the list is going to have a particular index that is unique and of type int, we add this as int for the type, and then the name of this variable will be the index, and the function delete task. Actually I can use the snake case naming convention for this. So with the fact that we are working with the route parameters as the index of type int, we need to pass in that as a parameter for this function too. So the parameter it's going to take in is going to be index. So for us to be able to delete a particular task, we want to check if the provided index is within the valid range of indices for that task's list. So I will therefore go ahead and check if it's within the range and also less than the length of our task variable. So if that is true, we shall therefore delete that task using its index value. So tasks, then we pass in its index. Of course, these are the basics of working with lists. So we pass in the index, and having passed in that index, we can redirect to our home page too. So I'll return a redirect to our home page. So we now have to go ahead and implement the logic of deleting a task to the user interface by accessing these elements. So we are going to use the anchor tag for this task. So we shall pass in the href attribute and open the curly braces, then URL for, this is actually syntax for Ginger. So the URL for function is going to take in the method to which this logic has been implemented. So we can see that we are using delete task as the name of the function. So we copy that and we paste it here, delete task. And you know that we are deleting the tasks according to their indexes. In other words, the route is taking in a route parameter. So index through the loop, then we access index. So we are now going to go ahead and test our logic and see if we have the ability to delete any task. So I will run my application and go ahead and refresh it. So we know that we are working with a list that that is temporarily storing our tasks. So whenever I refresh, we are losing the recent tasks that we had created. So most of the times you want to work with an application in a way that it is permanently storing the data. So for that case, you can work with databases in a way that the tasks are being stored permanently. But we shall look at object relational mappers in terms of Flask, where we shall look at the Flask SQL alchemy in a way that we have the ability of maybe creating tasks permanently. So for now, we can go ahead and recreate these tasks. So when you try to refresh, we can see that we are having an issue. Could not build URL for endpoint, delete task. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and debug. When we check out, we can see that we actually forgot to pass in the @ sign for the decorator. So when we refresh, we can now see that we have to go ahead and recreate the tasks. So we have to go ahead and test our logic of deleting a particular task. So for example, if you wanted to delete learning about Flask blueprints, you can see that our tasks are now being deleted. So that is it for this session. You can actually go ahead and test yourself by implementing the logic that updates the task name. In other words, when you create a task, you have the ability of updating the task name. I actually uploaded the code for this project. You can check out the video description in a way that you have access to the link to the repository.